Hi folks, HR Funk here. Every once in a while I have an idea for a video topic that I think is probably not going to be tremendously appealing for the majority of my viewers, but the information that I want to pass on in that video I think could be very important for a certain segment of my viewership. And this is one of those very type of topics. And what I'm going to be discussing in this video could be very important to you if you are a professional precision rifle operator, or as I like to say, a sniper. Now, I was never a military sniper, but for years I was a law enforcement sniper. I don't know everything there is to know about this topic, but I know a lot of things that I learned over the course of actually training and operating as a law enforcement sniper. And by the way, every time I use that term, somebody in the comment section wants to come along and tell me that law enforcement agencies don't have snipers. They have counter snipers, or they have tactical long riflemen, or whatever. I was a sniper. I was a sniper for years. The officers in the tactical teams all around me who had the same duties as I did were referred to as snipers. So I can't help it that people have come along with euphemisms or come up with other words because the term sniper makes them feel a little too squeamish. But I don't assign anything good or bad to the term sniper, just like I don't assign anything good or bad to the term firearm. Everything has to do with context. So please don't try to correct me in the comments section because you're not going to have any success. In any case, as I said before, what I'm going to be talking about could be critically important to improving your performance if you are a professional precision rifle operator, and it could have a lot to do with protecting you in the event that you do have to deploy and actually fire your rifle in an operational setting. Now, I should probably warn everyone here at the beginning that this is not going to be a particularly exciting video. I'm not going to be doing any live fire shooting. I'm not going to be handling any firearms. You're not even going to see any firearms other than the ones that I have in front of me right now. And as I said, I'm not even going to be handling them. So everyone at YouTube, take note, this should be one you like. In any case, what I'm going to be talking about is one of the most important pieces of equipment that you have as a precision rifle operator, and that is your rifle data book. I'm going to be showing you several different data books. I'm going to be talking about the one that I used. I'm going to be talking about the things that I look for in a data book, and even some suggestions that I have to improve the format of a data book moving into the future. So here we go. So why am I even talking about rifle data books? If your rifle were a person, the data book would be, or at least should be, a very detailed biography of that person. It is a record of your rifle's performance, its performance under different conditions, with different ammunitions, in different types of shooting situations, and it's a record of your performance with your rifle under those same circumstances, conditions, etc. Your data book can help diagnose issues with your rifle if they develop. It can help diagnose problems with your shooting and help you correct them. And it can provide documentation of your training and performance with your rifle if that should become necessary in any sort of legal proceedings. I think what really kicked things off for this video today was the fact that I found out that my target sponsor, Targets Online, actually publishes a rifle data book. And I wanted to get one and take a look at it to see if I could evaluate it, because I have used several of these over the years. And I really wanted to see what this one had to offer and if there was anything that was going to be different or an improvement over some of the data books that I've used in the past. And when I start to look through here, there are a number of things off the bat that I like, and they are similar to other data books that I've used. The very first page is a round count for the rifle that's being tracked with this data book. We can see there's a space for the date, any kind of remarks about the date when that round or those rounds were fired, the number of rounds fired, and then a running total. The one thing I don't care for is there are only 30 spaces available to record rounds that are fired through the rifle. That would probably get me through maybe 1 year, maybe not, just depending on how much I was shooting the rifle. When I was an operational sniper, I was shooting at least once a month. And sometimes I was shooting a couple of times a month if I went to any sort of a sniper training course or anything like that. All of those rounds got listed into my data book. So 30 spaces for a running round count really is just not that many. And as you can see, this is a spiral bound data book, so it's not really easy to get additional pages like this and then insert them into the data book as it would be if this were a binder or something like that. Moving on, the next page is a record of any kind of maintenance performed on the rifle. And I would say this is not routine cleaning. This would be something like replacing an optic or rebarreling the rifle or any other sort of work, maybe a yearly armorer's inspection that was done to the rifle. Those type of things would be listed in the maintenance log. This is nice, and this is something that I have in my data books also. This is a place where you can indicate the proper sight setting for your rifle with the specific ammunition that you use at varying distances. Now, when I look at the distances here, this is a little coarse for my use. For example, it starts at 50 yards. I actually have data on my rifle down to, I believe, 10 yards, and then very detailed data every 25 yards out to a distance of 300 yards. Now, as a law enforcement sniper, I really did not go beyond that, at least not for my data book. I have fired the rifle beyond that distance, and I have recorded that data in the book, but I actually have it memorized out to 300 yards. This is set up more for a military sniper or maybe someone that shoots in PRS matches or something like that with data out to 600 yards. Now, interestingly, I've got two different sections here, so you could record two different types of ammunition. If you have an open air round and a barrier penetration round or something like that, you could have data for both rifles, or both rounds rather. So that would be helpful. Another thing you'll notice on this page is a section for wind corrections at these various distances. And this is nice because it's set up for 10 miles per hour. And 10 miles an hour is a convenient wind speed because if you have a different speed, for example, if it's 7 miles an hour, you can take your 10 mile per hour correction times 0.7, or if it's 12 miles an hour, you can take it times 1.2 or what have you to come up with your proper wind setting for whatever conditions you're shooting in that day. On the next page, we start to get into some of the meat and potatoes of the data book. And this is where we're actually going to be collecting our data that later can be used for some of those things, like determining our proper sight settings that I was talking about a few pages back, and looking at things like wind correction and diagnosing those problems that I was mentioning and all those sort of things. The better the information that's recorded in here, the more useful this data book will be. Top left-hand corner, we have location. This might be the range where you're shooting, or it could be some other location. Date and time, temperature, light conditions, and wind speed. Now, that is the only thing they really have for environmental conditions, other than down here we have these clock faces that we can use for light direction and wind direction. I would like to see a few other things on here, such as humidity, barometric pressure, altitude, those type of things, because all of those could have an influence on how our bullet performs that particular day. Moving on, we have a place for distance, and this almost needs to be down here with the shot calls, because the distance, depending on the type of training you're doing that day or specifically what you're working on, could change. It could change several times in the course of shooting one drill. So I would like to see this incorporated into the actual shot calls, and if it stays the same, you could just put quotation marks or something to show that there was no change, but if it does change, you would have a place to record that and not try to squeeze it all into here. Same thing with position, because you might start out in a supported prone position for your cold bore shot and then move on to do firing in some other position. I would like to see that incorporated, or at least enlarged, so you could change that depending on what you're doing that day. Rate of fire, that's not bad, and especially if you're doing some sort of timed fire or something like that, you've got a place to record it. This is nice, showing specifically what type of support you're using: bipod, sticks, slings, bags, whatever. I normally have to, with my data book, put that in the notes section, but it's nice to just be able to circle one and then move on. For our shot calls, and a lot of people don't understand the purpose of calling the shot. When you call your shot, the last place you see your sights, or in this case your reticle from the scope, when the shot breaks is your shot call, and you record that. Then if the shot strikes your target and you plot it on the larger target over here, and it is in the same place as your call, then you're on call. If you call the shot one place, but the bullet strikes a different place on the target, then you have to try to analyze that and determine why the bullet struck a different place than you saw. Now, it could be just an issue with your call. Maybe your call was bad. Or maybe something changed from the time you fired your last shot. For example, the wind might have changed. Or if you're firing your first shot of the day and you call it one place and it strikes a different place, maybe some other conditions have changed, maybe with regard to temperature or humidity or what have you, that's causing a variation in your bullet's point of impact. Or maybe something has changed with your rifle. One of the things with that running total of rounds that you saw a few pages ago is a way to track how much wear there is on your rifle barrel. And I have worn out rifle barrels in the past, and I have had them die all of a sudden. They'll be shooting just fine, just fine, just fine, and then all of a sudden the accuracy just goes. And if I see something like that when I'm shooting or when I'm making my calls and plotting my shots, and I go back and I look and I see that there are quite a few rounds through that barrel, that's a pretty good indication that maybe that barrel has now outlived its useful life. If you have changed sights, that could be something that would cause a variation in your point of impact as opposed to your point of aim or your call. If you have changed to a different type of ammunition, you might need to start to record where that type of ammunition strikes as opposed to where the ammunition you use more frequently strikes. And as we saw a few pages back, you can keep a separate record for your point of impact and sight corrections and one thing and another for that different type of ammunition. Or if you're changing altogether to a different type of ammunition, then you might need to reset the zero on your rifle or what have you. We do have a place to list the type of ammunition we're using and that ammunition's lot number, and both of these could become critical once again if you switch to a different ammunition or you're using the same ammunition but a different lot number, and all of a sudden your accuracy changes or your point of impact changes. That could be an indication that the factory did something differently when they produced this new lot of ammunition than the one you had been using. And again, you might need to make some other corrections to make sure that you're still getting the type of accuracy and, more importantly, the point of impact that you want from the bullets that you're firing. Also on this page, we see the proper elevation and windage settings for the conditions we're shooting in that day. As we're making our calls and plotting our shots, we can determine what our proper sight correction is for those conditions. And this is where we really start to build our data for planning future shots, because we can then go back on that day and see how the rifle performed in those same environmental conditions on previous occasions and use that to help plan the shot on that particular day under those conditions. This is kind of nice, and I don't think I've seen this before, where you have a place for your hold if you're holding off for wind, or if you're using a particular hold with your reticle rather than changing your elevation setting when you're firing at different distances. That's nice to be able to record that. And you have a place here where you could put what shot number that was. So I kind of like that. This is one of the common failings with every data book that I've ever used. You get this little tiny place for notes. And as I'll show you in a little bit when I get my data book out, this is normally completely full by the time I'm done, and I'm writing down here at the bottom and up around the side and everything else to try to get all the information in there that I want. It almost would be nice to have one page with your call and your plotting and maybe the entire back page for notes from that particular day's training. I've not seen a data book that does that, but that's something that I think would be helpful. One of the big issues that I see with this data book, though, has to do with the fact that they've chosen a couple of targets here, and you can see the first several pages have calls and plots for headshots, and then back here, after several pages, it changes over to body shots, and you have this specific type of target. If on a given day, I start out and maybe I fire my cold bore shot on a head target and maybe a 3-shot confirmation group on that same target, and I plot that on there. And then I move on to doing some other type of training where I'm shooting body shots. I don't really like the idea of having part of one day's training here and then having to go back through the book somewhere else to find the other day's training back here, and I would have to put a notation of that in my notes, go to page whatever, and then I would have to find that page to finish. I just really don't care for that. And it's one of the failings or one of the difficulties with a spiral bound data book like this, because again, I can't easily just remove that page from back there in the body shot section and insert it up here with the first section that I shot, or vice versa. It can be done if you want to take the spiral out of this book and change pages around, but again, it cannot be done easily. The other option would be to just simply remove each page after you're done training that day and keep them in a separate binder or something, but again, that's not tremendously convenient. At the very back of the book, there are some blank pages, and again, this is helpful because you might not always be using a target that looks like this or a target that looks like this, and being able to freehand draw your target and have your calls and your plots could be very helpful, but again, there's no way to change that around. That's one of the things I really don't like about this data book. And probably the last thing is, much like at the very beginning, there's just not that many pages in this data book. And I'm going to grab my data book for this rifle and show it next to the Targets Online data book, just to give you an idea of what type of documentation you stack up over time. And here again is the Targets Online data book, and here is my data book for this rifle. So a few more pages there than I have available in the Targets Online book. And this actually shows an evolution of my data book for this Remington 700P. The initial data book that I had when I was issued this rifle was this one. And I filled this up over a number of years, and when I went to order a second data book like this, apparently this company had gone out of business. I cannot find these data books anywhere. And I had gotten to the point where I really liked them because they have a lot of the data in that I was talking about before, and I should probably use this portion to begin with. There were some things I didn't like about it. For example, how closely I had to put my numbers for target plots, and I only had one type of target down here that I could indicate on my calls and plots and what have you. And what's the date on this thing anyway? May of 1997. And every shot that I fire through this rifle is recorded in this data book. Still, to this day, I just re-zeroed the rifle for different ammunition. It's been a couple of months ago, and I still recorded that in this data book. Every round that it has ever fired has been documented, so that if for some reason I would need to go back and look at the rifle's performance over the course of history, I can do that. And again, I still do that even though I have retired as a sniper back in 2014. Still, I maintain my data book for this rifle. So when I filled this book up and determined that I could not order another one just like it, I started to look around for other options, and I came across the Storm Tactical data book, and I thought that I was going to like this. For one thing, you notice it's in a binder, which makes it convenient. I can move those pages around like I was talking about before. This tracks a lot of information. It gives me a lot of places where I can add in my calls, put in my comments. Again, I've still got this little short section for remarks here, and you can see that I'm writing down at the bottom of the page and all over the place to try to squeeze that stuff in there. The thing I didn't like about the Storm Tactical is the pages of the data book correspond to targets that you would get that they sent you on a CD. and you would take the CD, put it in your computer, and print off these targets. And there were things about the targets that I didn't like. The targets, I think, were more intended for maybe military snipers, I'm not sure. But there were just a lot of things I didn't care. You can see I'm putting my little figure drawn in over here to indicate what I was doing that particular day. So I just wasn't crazy about the Storm Tactical book, and I really liked my original data book better, but again, I couldn't get it. So I ended up going to a local printer, and I used my initial data book as a reference and redesigned it. I had them redesign it to my specifications. And now I had the plotting target much smaller, so if I needed to draw in my own target, I had room to do that. I had room over here where I could draw different things. For example, this was a 1-inch circle spotter that I was using for training this particular day, which I've noted down here, and then I just draw my 1-inch circle over here on my plots. Then I moved over to working on headshots, which I plotted up here on the other target, and this just gave me a lot more flexibility. I have all of my environmentals over here. Now, this is something where if I was redesigning this today, I would add something in here. I've got my zero range, my temperature, my humidity. I would add barometric pressure to that. I do have altitude, and I'll move this where you can see. I do have altitude up here that I can track, so that's kind of nice. But this just gave me a lot more flexibility. I was able to include a lot more data with this type of a format, and it worked much better for me than the Storm Tactical or even my original data book that I was issued back in the 1990s. Another nice thing about this book is it gave me some pages to record additional nice-to-know information. For example, I've got my rifle serial number, the type of ammunition that I used. I made a notation down here that when the original data book was full, that I had the pages reprinted. So there's a difference between these pages and the older ones that I showed you before. I've got blank range cards that I can fill in when I'm out actually in position somewhere. One of the things I really like about my older data book were the pages for including information about a specific operation when I was actually out in position. And I could record all the pertinent information. You can see that I've covered over the address for this particular operation that I was on, but it was for a meth lab serving a search warrant. I've got pertinent information about the structure. I've got information about the individuals we were looking for, my position, and all of that, which I could use later when I would write my actual report. And since I'm a fan of having all my information in one convenient place, it was also in my data book. So if there would ever be questions about anything regarding that operation, I could actually flip back through my data book and find that right here. Now, you might have noticed that this is also a spiral-bound book, and I've talked about that a couple of times with the SPRS Online data book. I actually removed the spiral and then reinserted it into my new pages in this data book when I put it all back together. So now you might be saying, okay, HR Funk, this is all well and good for tracking my rifle's performance and documenting my performance with it and potentially diagnosing problems with my shooting, but what is this ever going to do for me in the case of some sort of litigation? Well, several things. First off, it indicates all of your past training and use of your rifle. It indicates what kind of conditions you were shooting in, all of your preparations. You should indicate how you were feeling that day, if you were extremely tired, if you were shooting after a long shift and you had to get a qualification in or what have you, and how you shot during those times, all of which could be pertinent information if something you did regarding use of force is later examined in court. All the information is subject to subpoena in your data book, and again, the better the information that you include in your documentation and the more thorough that documentation is, the more that can help you later on in the event that anything is questioned in court. Something I would really like to see moving forward would be a data book application that could be installed on a smartphone. This is something that I think could be very, very beneficial if it's done right and if it's user-friendly. I had an application that was on here some years ago that was trying to be a data book, but it just couldn't recall the information in the format that I needed it, and it just was not all that helpful, and the paper data books at that time were still better. But something especially where I could take pictures of the targets that I was using during a training session and indicate my calls and my plots on those photographs, and be able to recall the bullet performance on those days based on weather conditions or distances or types of exercise or what have you would be very, very helpful. But again, it's something that would have to be very user-friendly, and it would have to be very simple to use, because especially if you're trying to get information into your phone during the course of a training session, or especially on an operation, it can't be something that you're fiddling around with for a great period of time just to get that data entered into the phone. So there you go, folks. To those of you who find this information helpful, I hope that you got something out of this. And again, I think this is going to be a small group of people, so I'm not even going to release this video as part of my regular production schedule. As soon as I get edited, I'm going to put it up. And again, hopefully you'll get something out of it. And that's going to do it for now, folks. As always, if you have any questions or comments on this video, be sure to forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off your purchase from Optics Planet. Also, remember the new discount code from Hot Munitions. If you go to Hot Munitions, you can use my discount code there, which is HRFUNK10, and that'll save you 10% off your purchase from Hot Munitions. And last but not least, the target sponsor for the channel, Targets Online. Go to Targets Online, check out their inventory, and see if they have anything that's going to meet your target needs. See you next time, folks. Until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.